Lakota chief prayed alone at sunrise for a lost daughter. A widow brought the girl home and stayed. The pipe stem was cold that morning. I remember that more than anything else. The way the stone bowl sat in my palm and gave nothing back. No warmth, no breath of smoke, nothing rising. I had packed it the night before, the way my father taught me, the way his father taught him, but I did not light it. I just held it in the gray before sunrise and let the cold come up through my knees from the ground. And I prayed without fire because I had run out of the kind of courage it takes to make smoke. Her name was Wombly Win, Eagle Woman. She was 15 when she left, and that was 8 months before that morning, and every prayer since had been the same prayer going nowhere. My wife Chantechilla had been dead 3 years. The council had its business. The horses needed tending. The younger men looked to me for steadiness, and I gave it to them every day, morning to night, because that is what a chief does. He holds. He stands. He does not show them the hollow place. But at sunrise, alone at the eastern edge of the camp, I could be what I actually was. A father who did not know where his daughter was sleeping. A man asking the same question to the same sky and getting the same silence back. I set the pipe down on the flat stone where I always set it, touched the ground with both palms, the way my grandfather showed me when I was small enough to fit under his arm. Then I stood and turned back toward camp and went to do the day's work. The trouble with Wombly Win had not come from nowhere. I knew that, even if knowing it did not help. She had her mother's fire and her mother's stubbornness, and she had my silence, which is the worst combination a person can carry. After Chantechilla died, she grieved in a way I did not know how to reach, loud, and then suddenly nothing, like a river going underground. She wanted the world to answer her, and the world did not answer, and so she started looking for an answer somewhere beyond the camp's edge. There was a man. There is always a man when a girl is that age and that unmoored. He was a mixed-blood trader who came through in the spring, and he had an easy way of talking and a horse that was too good for the work he claimed to do. I did not like him, but I had no cause to forbid him, and Wombly Win was not a child you forbade things to without cost. I spoke to her twice. She heard me and did not listen, which is its own kind of listening. She heard the worry in it, at least. In the late summer she was gone, the trader too. I sent 2 men after them, and they came back without her. Not because they couldn't find her, they found where the trader had gone, a settlement 2 days east, but she had told them to go home, told them herself, standing in a doorway. She was not a captive. She had chosen. That word, chosen, was the one that sat in my chest all those months like something with edges. Not grief exactly, not anger, something that had both in it and neither of them fully. I sent word through 3 different traders over the winter. I asked a missionary who passed through to carry a message. Nothing came back. The silence was the answer, and I had to decide every day what to do with it. I decided to keep praying and keep doing the work in front of me and not let the younger men see me hollow. Most days I managed. Some days I didn't. The widow came into camp on a Tuesday in late spring, which I know because old Matachinchala had just returned from the agency post and was still sorting through what he'd brought back when the wagon came in from the south road. I heard it before I saw it. Single horse, light wagon, the wheel squeak of something that needed grease. Then voices, my nephew Shungmanitu running toward it, and a woman's voice calling out in Lakota that was good enough to understand but shaped by a white mouth, the words in the right order but landing with the wrong weight. I came around the side of Matachinchal's lodge and stopped. Wombly Win was in the wagon bed. Not sitting up, lying on her side, wrapped in a trade blanket, her face toward the sky. Breathing, I could see that from where I stood, the rise of the blanket, and that was the first thing I checked before I could look at anything else. Breathing. Alive. The woman on the bench was maybe 40, maybe a few years past. Brown hair going to gray at the temples, a plain face that had seen weather and didn't apologize for it. She had the reins easy in her hands, and she was watching me with a steadiness that was not challenge and not submission, just the level look of a person who had decided before she got here how she was going to hold herself. She said in English, "Are you her father?" I said I was. She said, "She's sick. Fever broke 2 days ago, but she's weak. She needs rest and food, and I suspect she needs home more than both." I was already moving to the wagon. I got up on the wheel and looked at my daughter's face. She was pale under her coloring, the skin around her eyes bruised looking from the fever. But she opened her eyes when I touched her forehead, and she said my name, not Chief, not Father, just the name she'd called me when she was small enough that I carried her on my back, and something in my chest that had been locked for 8 months opened like a door with a broken latch. I said, "Wackich-hun, I'm here." She closed her eyes again. I climbed down and looked at the woman. What happened to the man she was with? The woman's expression didn't change. "He's gone, left her when she got sick, that's the kind of man he was." She said it flatly, the way you state a fact about weather. "I found her at the edge of my property. She'd walked a fair ways on her own." A pause. "She's stubborn." "Yes," I said. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved across the woman's face. She didn't let it go far. Her name was Clara Haverstock. She told me that a little later, after we had brought Wombly Win into my lodge and settled her, and she had eaten a little and gone back to sleep. Clara was still outside, standing at the head of her horse, not assuming anything, not assuming she was invited in, not assuming she was dismissed, just waiting to see what was wanted of her. That steadiness again. I had noticed it in the wagon, and I noticed it again now. I brought her water and dried meat, and she accepted both without making a ceremony of it. She had a homestead 8 miles south, her husband's originally, dead 4 years of a lung sickness, and she had stayed and worked it alone since. Her closest neighbor was 6 miles. She kept cattle and a kitchen garden and sold eggs to the settlement. She said this the way a person gives useful information, not looking for sympathy. The land was hers and the work was hers, and that was simply the shape of her life. I asked why she had brought my daughter north instead of to the agency or the settlement. She looked at me for a moment. "Because she asked me to. She talked about you when she was feverish. She said your name," a pause, "and because I had a daughter once. She died at 7. Fever, different kind." She said it without flinching, the way people who have carried something a long time say it, not to wound or invite pity, just because it's true and the truth doesn't need wrapping. We stood in silence for a while. The sun was getting toward afternoon, long shadows coming off the lodges. I said, "You can stay tonight. I'll have someone see you back safely in the morning." She nodded once, practical good. Wombly Win slept 2 more days straight, eating when she woke and sleeping again. She was young and she was strong under the damage, and the fever had broken cleanly. Clara had seen to that with a poultice and a willow bark tea she'd made before they left. By the 3rd day Wombly Win was sitting up and eating properly, and her eyes had some light in them again. Clara had stayed. Not from any word I'd given. I had said the morning after she arrived that she could go when she was ready, and she had said she'd like to stay until the girl was steady on her feet if that was acceptable. I said it was. I meant it as simple hospitality, one competent person to another. She made herself useful in the way of a person who knows how to be in a place that isn't theirs. She didn't impose, didn't hover, didn't treat the camp as something to be studied. She helped with small things when they were in front of her and left them alone when they weren't. The women in camp watched her carefully the first day, the way you watch any stranger, and by the 2nd day 2 of the younger ones were talking to her through gestures and bits of both languages, and she was giving as good as she got. She had a dry humor that came out sideways, almost hidden, the kind that makes you notice it only after you've already smiled. I noticed it. We talked a 2nd time the evening of the 3rd day, sitting outside with the fire between us and the camp settling toward night. Wombly Win was asleep again, better asleep now, the sound of someone healing instead of someone burning. Clara asked about the prayers at sunrise. She'd seen me from her sleeping place near the edge of camp and had not interrupted, but she was not a person who pretended not to have seen things. I told her about the pipe I had not lit, about the 8 months of asking the same sky the same question. I don't know why I told her. I had not told the council. I had not told my sister. She listened without offering me a solution, which is rarer than people think. Then she said, "My husband used to go out before light and just stand in the yard. I'd watch him from the window and I never asked him what he was doing out there. I think I should have asked." "What do you think he was doing?" "Probably the same thing you were," she said, "trying to hold everything together before it got too heavy." The fire popped. Somewhere across camp a horse shifted, stamped, went still. I said, "Did he manage?" "Some days," she said. "Some days he didn't, same as the rest of us." There was no pity in it and no false comfort. I appreciated that more than I could have said. She left on the 5th day, as my daughter was walking around camp on her own and arguing with her cousin about a horse, which was how I knew Wanbli Win was herself again. She argued about horses when she was herself. I walked Clara to her wagon. The morning was clear, a west wind carrying the smell of grass and something farther, the kind of air that moves in when spring is finally sure of itself. She climbed up to the bench and took the reins and sat for a moment before she turned the horse. "Your daughter's going to be fine," she said. "She's got your stubbornness." "I've been told that's not always a gift." "No," she said, "but it's better than the alternative." She started to turn the wagon, then she stopped. She sat with her back to me for a moment, reins in her hands, looking down the south road. Then she turned on the bench and looked at me the way she'd looked at me the first day, level, nothing hidden, nothing performed. "I don't get many days that feel like they mattered," she said. "This one did." She seemed to be deciding whether to say more and decided, "I'll think about that." She turned the wagon and went. I stood at the edge of camp and watched her go until the road bent south and the wagon dropped below a ridge and was gone. Then I went and ate breakfast with my daughter. 3 weeks passed, then 4. I did not stop the sunrise prayers, but the pipe was lit now most mornings. Something had shifted, not fixed, not resolved, just different. Wanbli Win was back, thin and quieter than before, working through whatever the winter had done to her in her own way and her own time. I didn't press. She came and sat with me sometimes in the evenings, and we didn't always talk, and that was its own kind of mending. The council had its business. There was a boundary dispute with a settlement to the east that needed careful handling, and the summer hunt to plan, and 2 young men with a quarrel between them that was about a woman, but also about something older than the woman. I did the work in front of me, and I held what needed holding, and I was present for the things that required me to be present. But I thought about her, Clara. I thought about the flat way she'd said he's gone, left her when she got sick, the way she delivered that fact without letting it be more than a fact. I thought about what she'd said about her husband standing in the yard before light. I thought about the dry humor she'd hid in the corners of her sentences. I thought about the morning she left, what she'd said. "I don't get many days that feel like they mattered." I had not been thinking about a woman for a long time. After Chante Chilla, I had closed that part of myself down the way you close off a room in winter, not destroyed, just not entered. It was a practical decision, and it had served me, and I had not questioned it. I was questioning it now. I did not do anything about it for another 2 weeks because I'm a man who moves carefully when the stakes are real. I asked around, quietly, about Clara Haverstock's homestead. The picture I got from the traders and from Matachinchala, who knew that country south, was the same picture she'd painted. A woman alone, working her land well, respected and not pitied by the people who knew her, stubborn about the homestead in a way that was clear to anyone who asked. No second marriage, no interest shown in any of the men who'd come around over the 4 years. That last part I did not ask about. It came back anyway. People are thorough when they think you're interested. I rode down on a Wednesday morning alone, on the roan gelding I trusted for long country. 8 miles south on the road she'd taken, then half a mile off it to the east toward the homestead she'd described. I found it easy enough, a solid house, more solid than most homesteads I'd seen, built by someone who meant to stay. Kitchen garden just coming up to the left of the house. Barn behind, good and tight. Cattle in the field south of that, 10 or 12 of them, stocky and well kept. She was in the garden when I rode in, working with a short-handled hoe, not looking up until I was 20 feet away because she'd already heard the horse and had made her decision about it. If it was trouble, she'd have dealt with it then, and since it wasn't, she'd finish the row she was on. When she looked up, her expression went through something quick: surprise, then recognition, then the careful level look settling back. She straightened and pushed a loose piece of hair off her forehead with the back of her wrist. "Chief," she said, not unfriendly, not overly warm, letting the visit announce itself. "Mrs. Haverstock," I said. I got down from the horse and stood with the reins over my arm. "The girl." Wanblee Wynn as well, arguing with her cousin, back to herself. Something in Clara's shoulders released that she hadn't shown was tense. "Good," she said, "just that." I had planned something to say. I had spent 2 weeks deciding on it, turning it over, finding the right shape. Standing in her garden with my horse blowing softly beside me, I found that the thing I'd planned sounded, in my head, like a speech, like something performed, and she was not the kind of woman who would want a speech. So I said what was true instead. "I have been thinking about what you said when you left, about days that matter." I looked at her directly. "I wanted you to know that it was not one-sided. What you did, how you were, it stayed with me." She looked at me for a long moment. The wind moved across the kitchen garden and raised a small sound in the new corn. "I figured it might have," she said. "That's partly why I said it." A pause. "Mostly I said it because it was true." "Then I'm glad you said it." She looked down at the hoe in her hand, then leaned it against her knee. "I'm going to put some water on. You can come in or not, up to you." I tied the horse and went in. We drank coffee at her kitchen table, which was a heavy pine table with one leg repaired by someone who'd done it wrong and then done it right on top of the wrong. The house was clean and plain and had nothing in it that wasn't useful or wasn't something she'd chosen to look at. Above the fireplace, there was a small oval frame with a photograph of a girl, 7 or 8, in a white dress, eyes that matched Clara's, looking straight at the camera like it was something to be assessed. I looked at it once and looked away and did not mention it. She saw me look and did not mention it either. We talked for a couple of hours, about the cattle and the summer grass and what the dry spring might mean for both, about the boundary trouble I was managing to the east, which she had some knowledge of because the settlement involved was the same one she sold eggs to, about Wanblee Wynn, carefully, both of us, what the girl had said in the fever and what she hadn't, about my wife a little, about Clara's husband a little. We were two people who had each spent years not talking about the hard things to anyone, and we were careful with it, and neither of us pushed. She had a way of listening that was different from most people. She didn't fill the pauses. She let a thing land and sit before she answered, and when she answered it was to what you'd actually said, not to some easier version of it. Chantay Hilla had had some of that quality and I had missed it in the years since, that particular kind of being heard. When I stood to leave, the light had moved a long way around the house, and the cattle were moving toward the barn on their own. At the door she said, "You'll come back." It was not a question, or not only a question. "If that's acceptable," I said. I wouldn't have said it otherwise. I rode back north through the long afternoon light, the roan easy under me, the grass coming alive on either side of the road, with the smell of something warm beginning. I came back the following week, and the week after that. The third visit Wanblee Wynn came with me. She had asked, and I had said yes, and I watched my daughter and the woman who had found her in the fever and brought her home sit together at that pine table and negotiate the complicated thing between them, gratitude and self-consciousness, and something that wanted, eventually, to be more than either. Clara did not rush it. She asked Wombly Win about horses, and she got an answer that lasted 40 minutes and showed no sign of stopping, and she listened to all of it with the same patient attention she gave everything. At the end, my daughter looked at her and said in Lakota that she was a good woman. I translated. Clara looked down at her coffee cup for a moment and then looked up. Tell her I've been told that before. I'm still not sure I believe it, a pause, but I'll keep trying. Wombly Win understood enough of the English and the tone. She smiled, which was not a common thing yet, not yet, but there it was. On the ride home she said to me, quietly, that the widow was not what she had expected. I asked what she had expected. Something softer, she said, something that needed more. She doesn't need much, I said. No, a pause, my daughter looking out across the plains with her mother's way of going somewhere behind her eyes. That's why she gives a lot. I didn't answer that because there wasn't anything to add to it. By midsummer I was making the ride south every week, sometimes twice. The council knew, or suspected, and said nothing to my face and probably a good deal to each other's. My sister asked me once directly, because she is the only person who asks me things directly, and I told her yes, the widow, and she looked at me for a while with her hands still in the work she'd been doing. Is she good? She asked. Not pleasant, not beautiful, good. Yes, I said. My sister nodded and went back to her work. Clara and I were not, I don't have the right word for what we were in those months. We were not promised to each other. We were not pretending to be less than we were. We were two people who had each had something real and lost it, and were being careful not to mistake convenience for something else, or grief for something else, or loneliness for something else. We were making sure, taking the time it takes to make sure. There were evenings I stayed late at her table and we talked until the lamp needed filling, and she filled it and we talked more. There was an afternoon I helped her fix a section of fence on the south field, not because she couldn't do it, but because 4 hands are better than 2, and we worked side by side for 3 hours without talking much. Just the work and the sun and the way you learn a person from how they move in effort. She was not a woman who wasted motion. She did not do things for show. She had a patience with work that came from knowing the difference between what you can rush and what you can't. There was an evening at the end of June when a storm came in fast from the west, and she stood on the porch with me watching it roll in. A real storm, the kind that means something, and she was not frightened, and she was not pretending not to be frightened. She just stood there with the wind coming and watched it come and put her shoulder against mine the way people do when they've stopped being careful about small gestures. I put my arm around her shoulders. She put her hand on my forearm. We stood like that while the storm came over. She didn't say anything about it after. Neither did I. It was what it was, and we both knew what it was. In late August I asked her. I had thought about how to ask and decided again that anything shaped like a speech was wrong for her. So I asked the way I'd started talking to her, plainly, what was true. We were on the porch after supper, the evening settling into something purple and cool, the first hint of fall in the air, the cattle shapes dark and moving on the south field. I said, I don't want to keep making this ride and then going home. She looked at me. I'm not talking about the ride, I said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the field or at something past it. When she looked at me, there was something in her face that I hadn't seen there before, not surprise and not calculation, but something that was just feeling, plain and unguarded, before she could decide whether to put anything over it. I was glad to see it. It was the closest I'd seen her come to being unmade. I know you're not, she said. There's no easy version of this, I said. The camp, the land here, what people will say. I wasn't apologizing for it. I was being straight with her because she deserved straight. I know that too, she said. I've thought about it. A pause. I've been thinking about it for a while. And she looked at me with that level look, but different from the first day. The same steadiness, but with something it hadn't had then, some warmth behind it that she wasn't hiding anymore. I'm not a woman who does things halfway, she said. You should know that about me. I do know it, I said. Then you already know my answer. It was not simple after that. It was not meant to be. There was talk in the settlement. There was talk in the camp, quieter but present. There were 2 men on the council who said nothing to my face and everything in their silence, and I let them have their silence and went about my work. My sister came to meet Clara formally in the early fall, at the homestead, and they sat across the table from each other in that way that 2 women who are both serious people sit when they're deciding about each other. And by the end of the afternoon, they were talking like people who share a language that has nothing to do with words. Wanbli Win helped more than she knew. She started spending time at the homestead, weekends, then longer learning the cattle work, learning from Clara things that a mother might have taught her if her mother had lived. I watched my daughter and this woman together and felt something that I hadn't expected to feel, which was the sense of a circle completing, not replacing what was gone, something else, a different shape, its own shape new. We married in October at the homestead small. My sister and her husband, Matachinchala, who was old enough to have earned the right to attend anything he wanted and not be questioned. Wanbli Win, who stood beside Clara the whole time and kept her jaw set the way she sets it when she's trying not to feel too much. The missionary from the East came to read the words. I don't know what I believe about his words or his God, but I know what I believe about the woman who stood beside me and said yes without any trembling, without any performance, with just the level seriousness she brought to everything that mattered. After Matachinchala told me I had chosen well, he said it the way he says things once, final, no elaboration needed. I thanked him. He said, don't thank me, I didn't choose her, you did. I still pray at sunrise. I do it at the homestead now, or at camp when I'm there, depending on the week, depending on what the work requires. The shape of the days is different now, split between the camp and the land here, between one life and another. And some weeks that splitting is hard, and some weeks it fits the way things fit when they've been made right. Clara is up before me most mornings. Not to watch me pray, she gives me that quiet, always has, but because she is a person who wakes early and has things to do and sees no reason to lie in bed past the doing of them. Sometimes when I come back in from the sunrise, she's at the stove with her back to me, and she doesn't turn around, just says something dry and practical about breakfast or the weather or one of the cattle that's been troublesome. And I stand in the doorway of my own kitchen and feel the warmth of the stove and hear her voice, and think about the morning 8 months before when I held a cold pipe and prayed to an empty sky. It wasn't empty, I know that now. It was full of things I couldn't see yet. Wanbli Win lives mostly at camp now and comes to the homestead on weeks when she and Clara have business together, which is most weeks. There's a colt she's been working with in our south pasture, a gray that she has decided is hers by right of stubbornness, and she may be correct. I don't argue with her about horses. I never could. Last spring, late, Clara and I were on the porch at the end of a long day, and she put her shoulder against mine the way she's done since that first storm, comfortable now, habitual, mine. The plains were going gold under the setting sun, and there was a hawk riding a thermal high up, just working the air in no hurry. She said, I used to think this place would be enough on its own. The homestead. The life, she looked out at the field. It wasn't, I just didn't have anything to compare it to. I put my hand over hers. She turned her hand and held on. We stayed until the hawk was gone and the gold went out of the grass and the first dark came in from the east, and we were warm and we were still, and there was nothing left to prove to anyone, and that was enough. That was plenty.